I'm Kirt von Daacke. I'm the co-chair of the President's Commission on Slavery in the University here at UVA. And I'm honored to be here at the University of Virginia's Memorial to Enslaved Laborers today to talk about how this memorial came about and the important work that it's doing. The commission was founded in 2013 with a rather simple goal of do the research about slavery and the enslaved at the university, do some education, and consider appropriate memorialization. And that was back in 2013. The commission immediately, during its first few months, made a decision that this had to be a community-based project. This wasn't really the university's story to tell in isolation from the rest of the world. And so we began a robust community engagement project. And the first thing we heard from the community is, you better darn well build a memorial, and it better be large and it better be visible. And so instead of just considering appropriate memorialization, we worked steadfastly to actually achieve some prominent memorialization about slavery at the university. As we went through a process of research and then publicizing that research, a truth-telling project that would signal to the community that we were serious about this work, that would educate our alumni and our students about the broader history here. And through all this, do some atonement that, slavery was in fact a system that was built upon horrendous violence, and it was part of Virginia's history and deeply a part of UVA's, Charlottesville's, and Albemarle's history. And so this memorial that I'm standing at today, that is waiting to be dedicated with descendants of the very people enslaved at this university, is a tribute to the commission's work and to that long community engagement process that really helped us design what's behind me. So I want to stop there and then pivot to, what is the history? So what we learned from the research project that should not surprise you is Virginia was in terms of population, the largest slaveholding state in the United States. Albemarle County, where University of Virginia is located, was a center of concentrated slaveholding, where over half of the population was held in bondage and over half of adult white male property owners owned at least one human being. So it's not at all surprising that the university was built and maintained by enslaved people until the general emancipation in 1865. And what we learned was that the story from the get-go was, again, always about enslaved people. Jefferson designed the university here on this what was then an abandoned farm, just a little under 2 miles from Charlottesville. And he designed it knowing that enslaved people would be involved in every step of the process. The very first time he visited the property to begin laying out what became the academical village, he arrived with his overseer, Edmund Bacon, and 10 hands, 10 enslaved people who helped mark out what became the University of Virginia. So from the very first moments people are here beginning to think about the landscape, it's a story about human bondage. During construction, this ran from 1817 to 1825, 1826, there were anywhere from a dozen to nearly 80 enslaved people living and working at the construction site, doing nearly everything imaginable. Digging earth to terrace the lawn, digging foundations, digging clay, shaping bricks, firing bricks, putting bricks in, building roofing systems along the lawn, every kind of work you can name, tinsmithing, blacksmithing. So they were here, they were everywhere. They comprised a majority of the workforce building the university. When the university opened in 1825, conditions changed ever so slightly. The number of enslaved at the university from that point on, at any given moment in time, was between about 100 and 200 enslaved people. We estimate over that time, from 1817 to 1865, at least 4,000 enslaved people lived and worked at the university or in a capacity connected to the university over that time. And so part of the project here was to acknowledge their lives, to, when we can, say their names, to acknowledge their humanity, their family, their resistance, their desire for freedom, and be really honest about slavery itself as an institution, how it was built on incredible violence. The memorial is situated within the UNESCO World Heritage Site. We are north and east of the Rotunda and Brooks Hall, adjacent to University Avenue, which you can see behind me. And this site was picked intentionally because it was visible to and gestures to the community. And it's also located in fields we know were designated by Jefferson to be fields that the enslaved would till to feed the students and faculty at the university. The enslaved lived in basements, in attic crawl spaces, and in outbuildings built in the gardens. And the gardens were essentially work yards for the enslaved that were surrounded by the serpentine walls, which, while yes, a beautiful design feature, were also probably 8 feet tall at the time of installation and meant to kind of hide the life and labor of the enslaved. This speaks to Jefferson's ambivalence about slavery. He knew it was wrong, but he couldn't imagine a world without it and couldn't imagine a really clear way to actually end it. And when he was thinking about his university, his main concern was the citizens his university would be creating, and he didn't want them to be corrupted by slavery. So his design and his use of the landscape was meant to minimize the visibility of slavery. So part of our project is making that invisibility visible again through this memorial. And as you can see as we've walked around, it's a series of concentric circles, rings representing the shackles of slavery. And at the entrance, they are broken, representing freedom and emancipation and the end of slavery. So the memorial's trying to do a lot of work about the enslaved, and it's meant to be directly in conversation with Jefferson's actual design. The outer circle is 80 feet in diameter. This is the diameter of the Rotunda Dome. This large inner ring to my left rises to a height of 8 feet to represent the serpentine walls that enclosed the enslaved. The inner ring to my right has a timeline on it, unflinchingly detailing the history of slavery here. It's not shying away from discussing the violence. It's also not shying away from talking about skill, humanity, and family of the enslaved, the things they were trying to maintain and maximize even while being held in bondage. It will ultimately have a water feature running over it as libation to honor them. This is not yet running. It will be turned on by descendants when we actually dedicate the memorial. We have 4,000 memory marks on this interior wall to my left. Each memory mark is a gash in the granite. The granite is Virginia mist. It was quarried in Culpeper. This is the same granite used on the Rotunda Piazza. So again, 8 feet tall, 80 feet in diameter, some of the same materials used in the original Jeffersonian academical village. So it's, again, meant to be in conversation with that landscape. The memory marks are meant to acknowledge the lash, the whip, the violence of slavery. Attached to those memory marks, where we actually have a name, are the names. Remember, 4,000 people or more enslaved here. From the research, we were able to identify or partially identify just under 600 names, mostly first names. Occasionally we have a last name. And those are placed next to a memory marks across the memorial. We also heard from the community, you must acknowledge labor and skill. Slavery was about stealing labor, and the community made this really clear. So we also include occupations that run from, ditch digging to carpentry, to classroom attendants, to maintaining the chemical laboratory in the Rotunda. So all sorts of occupations. And then you'll also see families, family notations. So mother, father, grandmother, right? These were human beings. And our attempt here is to retell their story as best we can by making it, again, much more visible to the community. And what's really spectacular about this is this location, this design came about from that extended process of community engagement, that we hired a design team. They worked with the commission to go out and do community outreach. We went to churches, community centers. We visited alumni throughout the Mid-Atlantic. There was a survey for students and faculty, and it's meant to speak to all of their interests and kind of demands for what this space was supposed to be. And in the center, what I love is it has this inner ring that tells the history, but it's also meant to talk about the hush harbor or the ring shout, the internal African-American enslaved community activities that happened at night and away from the gaze of the white enslaver. And this is meant to acknowledge community and create a gathering space for the 21st century and beyond community at the university. And it fits perfectly with what students asked for. They asked for a gathering and protest space. And we have this lovely grass green in the middle where you can come and contemplate, you can sit on the bench, you can read about the history of the enslaved. So I'd like to stop for a moment and zoom in on the timeline here so we can talk a little bit more about the history. I'm particularly interested in this 1853 post about Isabella Gibbons. She was an enslaved woman who lived at the university. We learned about her story because a local community historian had done research on her almost 20 years ago. And that led to us naming a building after her and her husband in 2015. And their lives have been the inspiration for the commission and for the university as we continue this work. She and her husband, William, were enslaved by different professors. They somehow managed to have and maintain a family. They secretly not only learned how to read and write, but taught their children how to read and write. And after freedom, in 1865, Isabella Gibbons went on to be the first teacher of color in the Freedmen's School here in Charlottesville. Her husband was the first African-American minister of an independent black church in Charlottesville and went on to found another church in DC. They're both buried in Oakwood Cemetery here in Charlottesville, and their lives are, again, a testament to the story we're trying to tell here, to the commitment to family, a commitment to education, a commitment to the American ideals of freedom, and their lives are also entirely in resistance to slavery and racism. And what's really amazing is we have very few images of those enslaved at the university. And the community said, if you're going to acknowledge humanity, you need to acknowledge humanity in visual form, a statue, something figuring a human being. We are lucky enough to have a photograph of Isabella Gibbons from the 1870s, and we used that photo as part of this memorial. The outer wall, facing sort of over toward Bodo's on the corner, has Isabella's eyes peering out from it. So when you come to visit, her eyes, depending on where you're standing and the weather conditions, her eyes will come in and out of visibility. So she is really the fulcrum point for this whole memorial, she and her husband and their lives. And the timeline ends in 1867 with her quote about slavery, and we'll stop there next. And we end here where the timeline ends in 1867 with Isabella Gibbons's words. She was writing to the Freedmen's Journal in 1867 to warn freed people about the dangers of making alliances with your former enslavers who may be pretending to be your friends. So she already understood in 1867 the possibility that white Virginians would not accept the terms of emancipation or accept black citizenship. And her words are really powerful. She speaks about never forgetting the horrors of slavery. And so we thought her words really animate this project, that now the university will never forget the horrors of slavery as they existed here locally. And we have this beautiful memorial to honor her and the 4,000 other enslaved people who became free in 1865 locally. And the monument ends with her words and then is situated along a sidewalk. And many of you will remember the sidewalk that runs from Mincer's back up to the Academical Village. It's still there. That's at the opening to the memorial, and it runs along the path that the sun rises and sets on March 3rd every year. So if you're standing at the entrance to the memorial and looking toward University Avenue at sunrise, you will see the sun popping up over the buildings along the corner. And March 3rd is the day in 1865 when Union troops, here as an occupying army, not a liberating army, entered Charlottesville, briefly occupied it for 3 days, and it was very clear that emancipation was about to begin. Over 1,000 enslaved people out of 14,000 people in the county got up and followed the Union Army out of town 3 days later, and about a month later, the war ended. And by the fall of 1865, the university had minimally accepted the conditions of the surrender, and we're now paying African Americans as workers at the university. And so it's that day, March 3rd, is celebrated locally as a day of joy about the receiving freedom, earning freedom, and becoming free and claiming citizenship. And so I think it's really special that the walk is part of that. And here in Charlottesville, we have Liberation and Freedom Day every March 3rd now. To celebrate this, the memorial will probably always be a piece of that. And then finally, to the other side of the memorial, there is a granite path leading sort of up toward Brooks Hall that points north. It points toward freedom, toward the North Star, and again, speaks to the desires of the 4,000 people held in bondage here at the university. Thank you.